Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Precious Metals Summit is brought to you by Nucor Gold.
Everything you ever wanted to know about resource stocks, but were too afraid to ask. This is Paul Harris for Kitco Mining at the 2024 Precious Metals Summit here in Beaver Creek, Colorado. Joining me today to discuss this is Warren Irwin, founder of Rosseau Asset Management. Warren, welcome to Kitco.
Well, thanks for having me, Paul.
We are on a good day to have this interview. Gold is hitting record levels of over $2,550 an ounce. But I want to get your opinion on this. There doesn't seem to be much joy here.
Yeah, that seems to be the whole talk of the conference here. As you know, the mood here is not exactly super exciting, and people aren't rolling in money. They're not all jacked about what's ahead of us. There definitely seems to be a massive delay here for a host of reasons, right? And the issue really comes down to capital flows, and can we attract investors that are happy invested in, let's say, a Vanguard ETF making 25% a year mindlessly into our sector? Do we have enough to offer them? That will happen someday, and but we're seeing here one of the positives really on the gold sector is we're starting to see some M&A activities, because if the stock prices don't go to levels that are reasonable and reflect what the gold companies are worth, larger companies that may have decent multiples will start picking them off, either with their stock or with cash. So we're starting to see some of the recycling of some of that money. And
let's sort of pick that apart bit by bit, if we may. One of the group of people, if you like, that I've seen very active here are the corporate development teams of the mining companies. They seem to be very overworked, which to me suggests they're actually seriously looking at breaking out the checkbook and doing deals.
Exactly the case. We see this in a lot of sectors right now in the mining business, where the stocks are not performing, but the commodity is doing well. The majors are making lots of money. And if the stock market doesn't pick up, they're just going to get picked off by the majors, who are building these massive cash balances. And how that really helps the junior market is, let's say, Cisco just got picked off, right, with their windfall project. Well, that money is going to be recycled back into the industry. And an added benefit of that is you've got a management team that has excellent track record, is going to be recycled into either a new project or whether it be gold or whatever other commodity. So it's really healthy to have that happening. And that's a result of not having the strong valuations, because it's just ripe for M&A right now. And every time there's a new management team free, and there's a lot of cash out there in the market, and investors who just made a pile of dough could say, hey, there's lots to invest in. They can start recycling that money back into the market. It's a very healthy thing.
I think something that really encapsulates that, last year at the Gold Forum, which is the Colorado Springs event, I interviewed Frank Justra, and during that he said he never ever comes to this event because there's too many people, he doesn't like it, everybody jumps on him, tries to sell him stuff. He's here, we interviewed him yesterday, he's out shopping, he's got various companies, he wants them to be multi-asset companies, he's got his shopping list, gold, copper and silver.
Well, I saw Frank yesterday walking around, and nobody was bugging Frank. And so it's a pretty quiet conference here, yeah.
Now, the gold price has gone up a lot. When you look at the share price of companies, some have gone up a lot, 100%, 50%, others haven't. So does that create the potential to use paper to do deals that perhaps 6 months ago wouldn't have been possible?
Yeah, it'll result in, it's going to be all arbitrage, right? You'll have high valuation companies picking off low valuation companies, and it's not that they're worth the low valuations, that their management team perhaps just couldn't get the story out, couldn't get the investor base to get their stock to a fair value. So all these relative value plays, they're going to impact M&A here for sure.
Now, if you could put two companies together in the perfect M&A transaction, who would they be?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. I cannot think one off the top of the head, but the mining sector is rife with you've got, in the old days, let's say Inco, Falconbridge, they should have merged, right? And you've got Newmont and Barrick in Nevada. They've sort of merged operations in Nevada. The whole market, the two would be Reunion Gold / G Mining or whatever they call it. With
G2.
That's the obvious one, right? They're it's the same structure. What are you going to do, build two mills and two mines? It should be mined all together. Those two should be merged. So that's just one glaring example, in my opinion, of what should be happening.
So should that be G Mining taking over G2 Goldfields or a third party taking them both?
Well, I had an idea I presented to people in the know. Like I don't have a dog in that race, but my opinion, how that transaction happens is the two companies, G Mining and G2, they come together at a ratio. They agree. They cut an agreement saying we agree to merge at this ratio. It's open for 90 days. So then any major could come and take a swing at G Mining, and they know exactly how much they'd have to pay G2 to take the whole thing out. That would make it simpler for the majors to do that, because right now, if the major wanted to buy one or the other, then all of a sudden you have a competitive process to buy the one and another competitive process to buy the other one. I think if the two companies work together, agreed in a ratio ahead of time, put a 90-day timeline, the major could step up and just take them both out.
Okay. One other thing related to the high gold price, it doesn't seem to have opened a financing window for the juniors. It still seems very, very difficult for them to raise capital. You're an investor, you write checks. What is it that companies aren't doing to get checks?
Well, sometimes what happens right now, and I think a lot of the funds in the current environment, if you talk to, I don't want to name names, but you talk to some of the big funds, they pretty much have to sell one to buy another, right? It's not as if there's a bunch of retail investors throwing money into their fund. That's not happening yet. The only source of liquidity for existing funds are takeouts likely of Cisco and others. That'll cash them up, and then they'll have a bit of cash, and they'll put it, but it's not enough. What you need is outside investors moving into the sector. You need that. It's really about funds flow. And until that funds flow happens, we're going to have stocks that are a little bit cheaper than they'd otherwise be, or having a little bit tougher time raising money than they would otherwise have. But surprisingly, I'm a big shareholder. I'm largest shareholder of GPM Metals, and surprisingly, we raised $2.5 million the other day. Surprised the heck out of me. We had more demand than we had shares, and so that's a good sign. I've seen some others pick up, $3 million here, $5 million there, and I've been quite pleased to see some people. We're starting to see a little break in the logjam, I think, of financings.
What do you think it would really take for that funds flow to accelerate? Companies, share price up 50 to 100%. If you're a producer, margins are expanding, you're putting cash on your balance sheet. What more do funds want to see before they start flowing?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's not even as much as how amazing the gold sector is. Sometimes it's that, hey, we have no other options, and what's beat up and what's down and out. Because right now, like I mentioned earlier, you buy a Vanguard ETF and you're going to earn pretty good returns. So I remember back in the early 2000s, what really got the mining sector going is when the NASDAQ collapsed 70%. Well, all that speculative money in that sector all of a sudden say, well, okay, we can't be invested in stuff that's not necessarily real. It's just ideas, and the internet was coming about. We need to buy good, solid assets like gold companies. That's when they started gradually moving into the gold sector, because the gold sector was super cheap, and then we had almost a decade run in the gold. So that's how I see it happening. We need to find not only a reason to invest in golds. I think there's enough reasons to invest in gold. Gold equities haven't moved. The gold has. There's a reason to invest in gold, but we also need a reason to drive people out of the market, and that might be a bit of an interim market crash where people say, valuations are a bit stretched in the S&P. Let's look at getting into something a little bit more defensive, like maybe buying some gold equities, perhaps.
Okay. Well, let's change tack. What are your thoughts on battery metals?
I think battery metals and the whole battery metals theme is possibly the stupidest thing I've ever seen in the mining sector. So that's a bit of a different view than most people have, I think.
And explain.
Well, what's really stupid about it, and I laugh my ass off when I hear it, is what do you do for a living? Well, I run a batteries metals fund. And I'm going, how on earth can you run a battery metals fund when you have no idea what metals are going to go into batteries? They're changing every 3 to 6 months. And that whole all the EV nonsense, any copper company I'm involved in, I say, whatever you do, please don't put a stupid EV in your presentation. Any nickel company, please don't be showing an EV being plugged in. The EVs are, well, they're dead in the water. We know Ford shut down their EV operations. I took a thorough look at the Ford Lightning as a possible vehicle. Small range, poor cold weather performance, lousy towing. So I bought a Ford diesel F350. It's fantastic. I'm nowhere near getting the stupid EV, and people in the cities are buying EVs. But as far as battery technology goes, this is why I wasn't behind the lithium craze, and that's why lithium's down as much as it is. Who knows what the composition of these battery metals are? So if you said, Warren, I'd like you to run a battery metals fund, I'd go, I have no clue what is going to be in the battery in 6 months. Samsung or some Japanese auto manufacturer come out with a new battery that charges in 5 minutes, has a 1,000-kilometer range, but it has no lithium in it, no cobalt, no nickel, no whatever, and it's made out of whatever metal, and but we just don't know what that is made up of. And the problem is the time it takes to define, permit, build a mine for any of these metals, it's so long, and things haven't gelled and things haven't settled yet in battery land that you could actually make any rational investments, in my opinion.
Well, we've certainly seen that in the lithium space and to a certain extent in the cobalt space. I was talking with the guys from Stillwater Critical Minerals yesterday, and in their corporate presentation, they've got this amazing slide. A lot of companies that are pursuing battery metals are obviously pursuing US Department of whatever funding, and they've got this great slide looking at that US government funding, and it's like a find Waldo, there's so much going on there, and navigating that must be a real nightmare. And one of the things I've also heard from, I participated in the Battery Metals Conference. This organization, the Precious Metals Summit, organized in Washington I think it was in April.
Yeah.
And they attracted a lot of people from the US departments, Department of Defense, Department of whatever, and it was very clear they didn't have a single idea about the mining sector. So, for example, you could hear, who's BHP? Just the biggest mining company in the world. They've got no idea.
Yeah.
So I guess that really talks to some of the challenges in that space.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. is really, really late to the party. The U.S. doesn't. The mining culture in the U.S. isn't as strong as it is. Like they have a strong mining culture, but it's a very small part of their economy. Whereas in Canada, let's say it's a bigger part of our economy. Yeah. And I heard that was a fantastic conference. I had a few friends that went to it. They said it was great. Lots of U.S. government officials saying the right things. But we have instances where I know of companies that I have investments with that are trying to find some of that U.S. funding, and they clearly are behind in their knowledge base of the sector. In fact, I was having a joke this morning how not saying I like to offend everybody, but I apparently offended a Department of Defense official at one point when he was spouting off about how much he knew about metals, and I said, no, you really don't know what you're talking about, and this is why, and how it didn't exactly go over very well. But there's going to be a steep learning curve there with the U.S. And the problem too, right, is there's no one group. Sometimes you're dealing with some strategic metals guys, the U.S. government. Sometimes you're dealing with the Department of Defense. It seems to be, it's definitely not coordinated effort, and the knowledge base is not there. And I've seen them, even in Canada here, I've seen some pretty dumb moves backing the wrong companies.
While we're on the subject of government interference, let's talk about Canada. And Canada's belief that it has a voice in who invests in what. Outside of Canada.
Extraterritorial rights on minerals. The Canadian government thinks it has it, which is completely and totally outrageous. And you saw how they smoked Solaris, right? I took a ton of heat on Twitter. I think I posted in January. I said, my contacts with the Canadian government are saying they're going to shut that deal down. It was Zijin Mining was putting money into Solaris.
170 million, was it? Something?
Yeah, it was fantastic for Solaris. They're making copper, and I said my contacts are saying they're not going to approve this. And Solaris got rather mad at me. And I've talked to Solaris. I said, guys, listen, you got 3 months here to try and convince the government otherwise. And they brought in the president of Ecuador up to meet with Trudeau, and they still made it so difficult for Solaris, they went elsewhere.
I almost caused a diplomatic incident by sort of writing something about that, about the government's program and the PDAC.
Can you imagine Justin Trudeau telling the president of Ecuador that we have a say as to who can invest in a mining project in your country? It's completely outrageous.
Well, it's certainly bully boy tactics, isn't it? But if Solaris, for example, had a copper project in the United States and it wanted Zijin to come and invest, there's not going to be the same kind of reaction from Justin Trudeau.
Well, there's a couple of things. I'll tell a few stories out of school, right? And we're probably aware that Solaris is re-domiciling outside of Canada. I think we know where.
They press released that, yeah.
They okay, good. So I think it's Aikido, good. So what's happening is our government in Canada is destroying the Canadian mining business. They're doing a lot of things to destroy one of the key industries in our country, Like they've destroyed the oil industry, they're in the process of destroying it. Now they're destroying the mining business. I don't know why they want to destroy the mining business. If we're going to accomplish any of the goals that they want to accomplish, we're going to need mining. But they're totally destroying our industry. What's happening now is everybody who has a brain in copper is re-domiciling elsewhere, because the only people buying copper and building smelters and doing this are the Chinese. Like, we had BHP took out Filo recently. That's a one-off, but it's the Chinese are the ones investing in copper. There are no Canadian companies investing in copper to any great degree. So if you go and find a copper porphyry, who do you get to help you drill it out? They're expensive to drill out. And when's the last time you heard of a copper smelter being built in Canada or the US?
Well, yeah, all the concentrates go to China.
They go to China. So great. So all of a sudden you put government regulations in. So now the mine is controlled by Canadians, but con still goes to China. So how's that? Like, these policies have not been very well thought out, and it's destroying our industry, and it's making it very difficult to invest specifically in copper or anything strategic, because a major source of funding is the Chinese, and they're being shut out. And the U.S. government, despite all their efforts, have not been stepping up to the plate to put their money where their mouth is yet.
Well, let's continue on the copper vibe. You're involved with SolGold, I believe, with Bob Sanger. I assume you're still involved with that.
Yeah.
What's your view on what's happening in the copper market? The deficit that's long been talked about hasn't, or is being very slow to materialize.
Oh, it's completely overhyped. Completely overhyped. The copper market is big, rich, and deep. And, Dr. Copper, they're saying, well, everything's going to change with EVs. Well, guess what? When's the last time you heard about the U.S. government upgrading its electrical infrastructure? I haven't heard that. Have you, or any major nuclear power build out where they're going to need a lot of copper, but just improving our electrical infrastructure? It's just not happening. And like you've watched EVs go like this, and now the sales are dropping off the cliff. So what are we going to need all this stupid copper for, right? Like, so when I invest in copper, I invest in copper with no regard whatsoever to this nonsense and EV hype. I invest in SolGold. Is a tremendous property, and I'm invested in it because it's a tremendous property. It's a tremendous copper property, and it produces a lot of copper and it produces a lot of gold, and that's why I invested. I do not talk 2 seconds about the nonsense of EV hype at all.
Okay. As an investor, when you see companies, I think you touched on this, when you see companies lead off their presentation with energy transition or EV, it sounds like that's a red flag to you.
Oh, that EV. Well, you know what they're doing, right? It's just baloney, right? So it's total baloney. It's like there's so much nonsense in the metal space right now, especially with critical metals and rare earths and lithium and cobalt and copper and all of them. It's nonsense, and I think people are finally figuring it out. It is nonsense.
Okay, well, let's talk about another mineral that you might have similar opinions on, I imagine. In Canada, uranium.
What about in Canada? What about it?
Well, the uranium. There's obviously a lot of uranium deposits in Canada. What's your outlook on uranium?
Well,
I know it's a leading question, Warren.
Oh yeah. Well, as you know, I've gotten into trouble with uranium. My projections on uranium, which I've been optimistic on uranium, but I haven't been a super bull on uranium, which means I'm a bear. And so all the paid pundits online have been attacking me because they try and bring some rational thinking to the whole uranium space. But the quick and dirty uranium space is, despite, again, all the baloney hype about AI, about electric vehicles and the nuclear power plants, like there's about 450 nuclear power plants already. They're all freaking old. And we're building about 10 a year. So you go 10 over 450, it's not a very big number. And of that 450, the average life, I used to know this off the top of my head, I don't know it, but these reactors are pretty old. And people say, well, Warren, you're all wrong because they're extending the life of all these reactors. Well, extending the life of a reactor is not creating any incremental demand. It's just stopping demand from falling off. So, and then we've got right now there's a lot of nonsense in the uranium space with the bifurcation of it, the East versus West. The Russians are threatening this and the West. So what's happening now is, all right, China will source their uranium instead of from Cameco in Canada, China will source it from Russia. And then people who used to source it from Russia in the US are now sourcing it from Canada.
So the pieces are just moving around.
Moving. But the key thing is there is no growth of any significant amount in the demand for uranium. So these uranium bulls, the only thing they can hang their hat on, which may or may not be true, is that consumption is this much, production is this much, and that gap in there is made up of secondary sources which are floating around the world. But they're convinced that that's declining and that we will run into a bit of a shortfall here. So, and there you go. So that's the only bull case, is that this large uranium inventory globally is declining. So I don't have enough confidence to believe anybody on that subject, because uranium inventories are very secretive. It's a very secretive commodity, unlike a lot of the others. And when I ask these bulls, I go, where were you when I was investing in uranium at $17 a pound? It's now $80. It's gone up 5 times, and now you're super bullish on uranium? Well, why weren't you super bullish at 17 when I was buying up uranium? It's a cuckoo market. It's really a cuckoo market. We'll see how it ends up. I'm definitely a proponent of nuclear energy, but we'll see what happens. And then, of course, you've got at some point, perhaps, next gen will come into production, which is 30 million pounds, which is a monstrous amount of uranium to hit the market. And how will the market deal with that? Will there be a period of time where it will be really, really tight supplies of uranium, and then when 30 million pounds hits the market, it just crushes it? But at $80 uranium, pretty much every project I know globally is economic. So is now the time to be a super bull in uranium? In my opinion, no.
Okay. Now, we've talked about a lot of things. We covered a lot of ground. How do you think the rest of the year is going to play out in the resource space?
Well, I think a trend that started is the M&A trend. And the M&A trend is happening because the majors are making lots and lots of money. And they're building these big cash balances. And they do understand they're in a business where they mine. And every day goes by, your mine is one day older. So you need to start filling the pipeline. And valuations are extraordinarily cheap right now. So we'll see more M&A, and that'll be interesting because we'll see that money will get in the hands of investors. And what will they do with it? Will they put it into Vanguard's ETF, or will they reinvest it in the sector, saying, hey, we really like the nickel sector or the copper sector or the gold sector, and they'll reinvest it. And then what happens if you start reinvesting and they start getting some returns, then the word gets out, well, there's some good money to be made in the gold sector, maybe, and then you start getting some big American investors. They just don't need to allocate a ton of their $20 billion fund into the gold sector to make a monstrous difference. It's not happening now, but I see at some point it will happen when the gold market starts showing some signs of life in the juniors, and people say, hey, this is a good way to make some money. Valuations on some other stocks other sectors we're in are overvalued. Let's start putting some money to work there.
Okay, it'll be good to when that starts happening.
Yeah.
Warren, it's been a tour de force. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Very nice chatting with you, Paul. Cheers.
And we have a lot more to come from the 2024 Precious Metal Summit here in Beaver Creek, Colorado. So hit that subscribe button. I'm Paul Harris, and this is Kitco Mining.
Kitco Mining's special coverage of the Precious Metals Summit is brought to you by Nucor Gold.